There's been a lot of great moments, but also a lot of bad ones. In my next few videos, I will be discussing the worst moments from each year of the ESPN era, starting with 2019, the first BMF fight being stopped due to doctor stoppage. And this fight was between Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal, two men who had become known for being kill or be killed type fighters inside of the octagon, always giving the fans a fun fight to watch. In the fight, it was just that. Masvidal came in and immediately started to dominate, landing really, really good punches, landing a good head kick, had Nate in all sorts of trouble. And while Nate was starting to come on as it got into the third round, the fight was shaping up to be an all-time great until the end of the third round. Masvidal had opened up a cut on Nate Diaz, and in between rounds 3 and 4, the doctor decides to put a stop to the fight due to the cut. Considering the context around the fight, it was extremely anticlimactic and ironic that the first BMF fight was stopped when it started to get interesting, all because the doctor thought it was unsafe. Moving on to 2020. Now, a lot of stuff happened in 2020. There was a lot of bad moments. You know, we had a pandemic, we had all this crazy stuff going on. But to me, the worst moment in the UFC in 2020 was Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Tony Ferguson being canceled for the 5th time. From 2015 to 2020, Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson had been canceled 5 times. 2 of them was canceled as contenders, and 3 fights were canceled as world title fights. Still, in 2025, we have never seen this fight, and honestly, we never will. They're both old. They're both, off doing their own thing. Khabib retired in 2020, and Tony, unfortunately, sadly, had gone on that 8-fight losing streak, and now he's off boxing. He actually picked up a recent win, which is really nice. But that fight between Khabib and Tony had become one of the most anticipated fights in UFC history, and the government had to come out with a worldwide virus just to get it canceled for the 5th time. The worst moment of 2021 is McGregor versus Poirier 3. And in July of 2021, Conor and Dustin were preparing for their 3rd fight after putting each other asleep in their last 2 fights. This was one of the biggest events in UFC history, as pretty much every Conor McGregor fight is. This fight had all the bad blood, all the drama, and all that was left for them was to clash inside the octagon. The fight was anticlimactic, to say the least, with Conor snapping his leg in very brutal fashion at the end of the 1st round. The fight was over. The drama ensued inside the octagon. Poirier was taunting McGregor, showboating. McGregor was making death threats and gun signs against Dustin. It was chaotic. It was real. And it was just chaos inside that octagon. At the end of the night, there was an incomplete fight, an injured McGregor who still hasn't returned after 4.5 years later, and he is now 37 years old. The injury was the domino that caused Conor McGregor to spiral since then. Many alleged allegations, alleged alcohol and drug abuse, and the biggest star in UFC history has spiraled into a shell of his former self, unknown if he will ever fight again. 2022. What is the worst moment of 2022? Well, I believe that it is Jan Blachowicz versus Magomed Ankalaev. This fight was for the vacant title after Yuri had to vacate the belt due to an injury. This fight replaced the original main event, which was Yuri versus Glover. That fight was going to happen until Yuri, like I said, he had to pull out due to an injury to his shoulder. They couldn't find an opponent that Glover was willing to fight, so they put Jan against Ankalaev for the vacant title to crown a new light heavyweight champion. This fight was already surrounded by controversy, and it only furthered when this fight went to a draw with no new champion crowned after 5 rounds. It only added to the UFC's frustration and even the fans' frustration that the fight wasn't even entertaining. It was a 5-round fight. It was boring, no rewatch value, not a good fight. So we got a boring main event to the last pay-per-view of 2022 and no new champion. This caused the UFC to scramble and put together Glover versus Jamal Hill a month later. 2023. The worst moment of 2023 is Islam head kicking Volkanovski. 8 months prior to this fight taking place, Islam and Volk went to a very close war in the fight of the year, with many believing that Volk had beaten this extremely dominant Russian in Islam Makhachev. Islam was originally supposed to face Charles Oliveira until Charles pulled out due to an injury, unfortunately. Seeing the opportunity to avenge his last loss, Volkanovski jumped on the short notice opportunity. We all found out why this was a bad idea, because Volk was knocked out by a head kick inside the first round. Even worse, Volk decided to go back down to 145 4 months later to defend his title against a power puncher and a great boxer in Ilia Topuria. Volk fans had fears that he was returning too soon after being violently knocked out just 4 months prior, and their fears were confirmed when Volk was violently knocked out again in the second round against Ilia Topuria. Many believe that Volk's decision to step up on short notice against Islam in 2023 was the catalyst to him losing his belt to Ilia and finding himself on a 2-fight KO loss streak. 2024. What is the worst moment of 2024? Well, in my opinion, it is Max Holloway versus Ilia Topuria. In April of 2024, Max Holloway was on fire. He had just beaten Justin Gaethje in the greatest moment in UFC history. I think that's undebatable. I think Max Holloway knocking out Justin Gaethje like that in the last moment of their fight, I believe that is the greatest moment in UFC history. Knocking him out cold in their BMF title fight at the last second of their fight. Max won $600,000 in bonuses in that fight. He gave the fight the fans wanted to see in the greatest moment in UFC history. And Max could fight whoever he wanted at this time. Max could have fought McGregor. He could have made generational wealth for him and his family. Not only that, but I believe that Conor would have lost to Max around this time. I would have heavily favored Max to beat McGregor at this time. But instead, Max decided to go back down to featherweight to fight Ilia Topuria and win a belt that Max had already had and defended multiple times. Max wouldn't be accomplishing anything new if he would have beaten Ilia Topuria that night and gotten the featherweight title back. And to make things worse, Max was knocked out in the 3rd round, bringing his momentum after the Gaethje knockout to a complete stop. Max's recent career would have gone completely differently had he not gone back down to featherweight to fight Ilia Topuria. And even still, Ilia ended up moving up anyway. If Max would have fought somebody else in the meantime, he would have still gotten the Ilia fight at 155 because Ilia chose to move up anyway. 2025. Finally, what is the worst moment of 2025? In my opinion, it is Aspinall versus Gane, the eye poke. And leading up to this fight, the fans, for years, we had to deal with the ducking of Tom Aspinall by Jon Jones. Jon was the champion at heavyweight, and Tom was the clear number 1 contender, even capturing the interim title and defending it against Curtis Blades. Even still, Jon refused to fight him, citing Tom's lack of experience in beating, quote, any top guys. Well, Jon, You were the final top guy for Tom to beat, and you refused to fight him. Even worse, the UFC allowed and supported this behavior from John. They skipped over Tom for months in favor of old man Stipe Miocic. The UFC decided to make John versus Stipe instead of John versus Tom. Stipe was a 42-year-old former champ who was coming off a brutal KO loss against Ngannou 3 years prior. Predictably, John finished Stipe in less than 3 rounds. And now that Stipe's out of the way, we can see Tom versus John, right? No, we can't. After the Stipe fight, John decided to vacate the belt, with the UFC promoting Tom to undisputed champion. And next, the UFC booked Gane versus Tom. Gane was the man that John had beaten extremely dominantly inside 1 round to win the heavyweight championship in 2023. Due to how easily John beat Gane, any success from Gane in this fight against Tom, John would twist as proof that Tom was never as good as him. Now about the fight. It was competitive, with both men landing good shots, but Tom was wearing some damage on his face. Eventually, Gane landed an eye poke that affected Tom's vision to the point where Tom could not continue. This was the second eye poke that Gane had landed in this fight. So, as if John ducking Tom wasn't as annoying as it gets, Tom's first undisputed title fight ended as anticlimactic as possible in an eye poke. No finality, no closure, no definite answer, just an unfinished competitive fight that ended in an eye poke, giving John more ammo to use as he sits at home knowing that he ducked Tom. And even all the backlash that Tom has faced since then. Backlash from the fans, backlash from the boss, Dana White, saying that Tom didn't want to continue. Tom couldn't continue. People saying that, oh, Tom's got his vision back. Well, in the fight when he needed it, Tom couldn't see. It doesn't matter if a day later or 2 days later, Tom's vision is back, because in the moment when he was fighting Ciryl Gane, he couldn't see. He needed his vision back in that moment, and it wasn't there. And so it's not Tom's fault. It's Gane's fault the eye poke happened. Gane is a habitual cheater inside his fights. Back of the head shots, nut shots, eye pokes, all of it. He's a habitual cheater. He cheated in this fight, and it's still out of Tom's control that this fight ended the way that it did. But everybody's blaming Tom. He's the one that took the eye poke. He's the one that was ducked by John Jones. That's the worst moment of 2025. So, the ESPN era coming to an end. It's been a long 7 years. It's been a short 7 years. I remember the first UFC ESPN event, Cejudo versus Dillashaw. There's been a lot of really good moments, really good events in that time, a lot of really good fights. But like I said, like this video has shown, there's been a lot of really bad moments. If you agree with me, if you disagree with me, comment below. What is your worst moment of each year of the ESPN era? If you enjoyed the video, please like, please subscribe. Thank you.